Welcome everyone to our webinar. The topic of today's webinar is how electric vehicles can transform the energy landscape. And this is part of our webinar series on envisioning a climate-safe future. We are so happy that you're here this morning. I want to say thank you to our sponsors and to our promotional partners for helping make this webinar a reality today. And just to give a brief overview of the agenda, I'm going to give some context on Climate Safe California, which is our flagship campaign at the Climate Center. And then Zach Woogan will present, followed by Melissa Chan, Rachel Zook, and Robert Stafford. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, and then we will be wrapping up and giving you an action you can take. So our mission with Climate Safe California is to rapidly reduce climate pollution at scale, starting in California. We believe in thriving, healthy communities, and we envision a future where everyone in California enjoys clean air and water, renewable and reliable energy, healthy food, thriving nature, and more. As goes California, so goes the nation and the world. We believe that California must lead because we have the tools and the know-how to lead. When our elected officials accelerate the transition to clean energy, all of us benefit. When we lead at speed and scale, then the nation follows. Our role at the Climate Center has been to push California to be a leader in making climate solutions a reality at speed and scale. As a think tank, we work on both policy and projects to turn our ideas into a reality. So we work with businesses, local governments, labor unions, and environmental justice leaders to deliver equitable climate actions. So Climate Safe California is our campaign that is endorsed by over 2,000 individuals, and the goal is to get California to remove more climate pollution from the atmosphere than we emit by 2030, and to do this while creating thousands of well-paying jobs in an equitable and clean way for the economy. We have 4 pillars of Climate Safe California: phasing out fossil fuels, scaling up natural carbon removal, investing in resilient communities for all, and funding climate action now. And on the community energy resilience team, which is where I work as the community energy resilience specialist, and which is the home for today's webinar topic, we are really trying to build the grid for the future. This means clean, local, reliable, equitable, and safe energy and storage that can help us avoid blackouts, reduce climate pollution, and protect our communities at the same time. And we believe that EVs have the potential to be a foundational part of building a decentralized, decarbonized, resilient, and reliable grid for the future. Our priorities at the Climate Center are to enact bidirectional EV charging legislation, to end state subsidies and tax breaks to oil and gas interests, to divest state employee and teacher retirement funds, defend the historic climate investments in a time of budget shortfall, and to fund through the budget and/or through bonds, regional hubs to help farmers and ranchers implement climate-friendly soil and habitat management at speed and scale. And I am now going to pass it on to our first speaker. So first, I'm going to introduce Zach Woogan, who is going to talk big picture about VGI in California and how we can unlock it across the state.
Great, thank you, Sheriel. Hello, everyone. I'm Zach Woogan on behalf of the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, or VGIC, and looking forward to sharing a lot of what we've learned with folks over the years. Starting with this simple statement that EVs represent untapped potential as flexible, distributed resources to provide or to support an affordable and just energy transition. Hopefully this is a statement we can all agree on. I have a feeling if folks are dialing in, they at least have some sense that this is the future. And so we're excited to continue working on this. When I say we, I mean the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, or VGIC. We're a nonprofit that's focused on unlocking the value of flexible charging and discharging. So this includes the bidirectional charging use case, or vehicle to grid, or the broader umbrella of vehicle grid integration, which we'll talk about in a moment. So that umbrella, VGI, that's a suite of ways that EVs can reduce the total cost of vehicle ownership, unlock additional value for communities, and provide services to the evolving electric grid. So there's the unidirectional or one direction managed charging, sometimes called smart charging or V1G. There's bidirectional vehicle to building or vehicle to home charging, often called V2B or V2H. And then there's bidirectional charging and discharging for grid services, also called vehicle to grid or V2G, sort of exporting use cases. And these are often, especially the bidirectional use cases, brought under the umbrella of vehicle to everything or V2X. So apologies for the alphabet soup, but there's certainly a lot of new terms and acronyms to learn here, and we'll steer clear of that in our presentation, and in general try to. But if folks have heard those acronyms, that's what they correspond to. We also talked about strategies to minimize the time and cost for the infrastructure upgrades needed to deploy EV charging. This is a key barrier for a lot of charging sites in California, is just the time it takes to develop the site. And we also talked about how to co-locate EV charging sites with other clean, distributed energy resources like rooftop solar or stationary energy storage and stationary battery energy storage systems. So why VGI, right? Why are we focused on this? First and foremost, it can help to accelerate the electrification of transportation and the transition to electrified fuels in California. It's such a large share of our emissions, and it's important to note that with smart charging or managed charging, we can not only reduce the fueling costs by switching from gas to electric or diesel to electric, but reduce those costs even further by charging in an intelligent manner that aligns with the grid. So we saw this in a recent analysis for Stockton Unified School District. And then on the bidirectional charging side, there's also opportunities for school districts or school bus fleets to earn additional revenue, especially during the summer, and be able to provide services for the grid and help offset the upfront costs of that school bus deployment, the electric school bus deployment. So transportation electrification, very important. Another important piece is the power sector electrification, or power sector decarbonization, rather. So with both managed charging and bidirectional charging, you can help to offset the use of old, polluting, what are called peaker plants or gas peakers. In the top right, that's actually a chart from New York, not California, but helps to make the point. We have a lot of old peakers. Many of them are quite dirty, some burning in oil and jet fuel, and it's really really messy. So rather than keeping those online or building new plants or even operating those, we can potentially use bidirectional charging or other charging management. So that's what's on the bottom of the slide here. You see circled in red a point where the use of natural gas actually falls off, and V2G kind of picks up some of the slack that's needed to meet your base demand there. And there's also impacts on cost, not just for participants or school districts, but for the system at large and the grid and all of the customers of utilities that help to support the grid and that pay their electric utility rates. So when you have sort of unmanaged EV charging, you might trigger large investments that the electric utility needs to make. On the right-hand side, you see an opportunity for actually managing charging in that orange, those orange bars showing how much we can have a lower peak demand, specifically at the distribution level or sort of the small scale level of the bulk grid. And that can really help to reduce the total costs that utilities need to recover from their customers to pay off all the investments they've made in building out the grid. So that's sort of the numerator of this equation in the bottom. And the denominator is how many actual kilowatt hours are sold or consumed by electric utility customers. And that equation on the bottom, that helps determine how high our rates are. And there's a lot more art and complexity that goes into designing rates, of course, but just at a high level, we can not only, using VGI, reduce our total costs, but also we can sort of spread those costs over additional kilowatt hours. And that's shown in the two figures on the slide here, courtesy of Synapse Energy, which show that a lot of charging in California can occur off-peak. So you're shifting the charging away from the peak where it would otherwise trigger additional costs. And then the right-hand side, it shows a bit of a comparison of the revenues and how much utility can make through their charging through energy sold through EV chargers, and then the cost of actually deploying those chargers and all that goes into it. So an important point here, a bit technical, so apologies for that, but there's a broader affordability imperative. In addition to that, there's an important community resiliency imperative, and of course, Climate Center works on this quite a bit. There's on the top here, you see an example of using smart charging to help customers ensure that their vehicles and their fleets are in fact charged ahead of a public safety power shutoff or a potential wildfire where you need those EVs to be charged in preparation and to not be left stranded once you sort of switch over to electric as a fuel. This becomes a much stronger consideration. And then the bottom, a pretty intuitive use case. These electric buses have very large batteries, and how can we use those during emergencies or to provide backup power to community centers? And there's a good example of that occurring in Oakland, California, with some transit buses. So what's happening in California? What's sort of the state of play? Well, I'll run through these quickly. There's a lot of text on the slide, but I'll note that California has a standardized pathway for bidirectional chargers to interconnect and get hooked up to the utility system. There are several novel ways to get compensated for selling power back to the utilities. So this could be the second, third, or fourth bullets. There's all sort of different designs and different mechanisms. Some of them you can sort of stack and participate in multiple. Some of them you can only do one. And then there are several active commercial deployments. So I showed a picture earlier of the San Diego Gas and Electric school buses at the Cajon Valley Unified School District, and a recent deployment with Pacific Gas and Electric in Oakland, California, with a company called Zoom, and a very, very large site there. So I'd encourage folks to check out those sites. There's articles about them online, and we may hear from other presenters today about those sites as well. So with that, wanted to encourage folks to follow up. Looking forward to today's panel, and happy to answer any Q&A as it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. And I'm going to invite Melissa on screen as our next speaker. Melissa Chan is with Fermata Energy, and she'll be talking about collaborative partnerships for equity and resilience.
Thank you, Shariel. And I don't know if you're able to fix this, but I'm blocked from restarting my video. I also understand if you'd rather not see me, but I can go ahead and share my screen and start presenting.
We'd love to see you. Let's
working on it right now, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. Great to see you. I really like seeing all the Q&A that's coming up. I think we're going to have a really great conversation. So just as Shariel said, I'm here to talk about collaborative partnerships for equity and resilience using vehicle-to-grid technology, just as Zach provided an overview in his presentation. So at Fermata Energy, we believe...
Melissa, right now we're seeing your desktop, but not the presentation.
Oh, shoot, that's not what you want to see. Okay, let's back up. Stop sharing. Try this again. Thank you so much for that feedback. Okay, am I showing the right thing now?
Yes.
Great. All right, so I'm not going to reread this title slide, but at Fermata Energy, We realize that most EV chargers increase building load, landlord utility bills, and assume tenants have EVs. Vehicle to everything can flatten the building load and bills while providing mobility with shared EVs and chargers. So this concept is that EVs can manage the grid, building load, and provide a mobility resource all night and day. So actually starting off with day, and as I do, I'm working backwards here, but thinking about the whole every hour of the day, starting at 8 o'clock as everyone is getting up, running their toasters and, I don't know, drying their hair, the car can flatten the peak. Somebody might take it out to take kids to school or run an errand, soak up some power during the solar peak. Somebody might take it out in the afternoon, again, maybe to pick up kids from school, recharge that EV right before the evening peak so that you can discharge and flatten the peak when everybody is coming home all across the state. Then overnight, recharge, maybe somebody needs it to go run a late night errand, and then slowly recharge until 8 the next day. So we think about this as like a 24-hour cycle. You know, I'm full of all kinds of really dorky fun facts about EVs. They tend not to be driven very much. People drive cars only like 15% of the car's lifetime. And when we do, typically cars don't go more than 30 miles round trip. So pretty much all of our cars in driveways and garages and on the side of the street don't travel very much. And when they do, they don't go very far. So as a quick overview, Fermata Energy's technology is a software platform. So we do not make the EVs, we partner with the manufacturers. We also partner with charger manufacturers. I saw a question in the Q&A about available chargers today. Right now at this very moment on June 20th, 2024, all of the chargers that are available for sale are 3-phase and 480 volts, as in they're DC, fast charge, but low power. There are household-sized chargers that are coming to market, we estimate, by the end of this year. This is a snapshot of our technology, our platform, the software, and your experience as a customer using the card to manage your site. And we integrate with the utility on the back end in order to optimize grid services. So this is the first slide of 2 that summarize the types of projects that I have operating with respect to that slide where I showed you what a car could be doing over the 24 hours of its day-to-day life. So one of our longest running projects, which is actually technically not a car share, is in my home city of Boston, Massachusetts, where we're partnered with a local community development fiduciary institute, or CDFI, a low-income landlord, and enterprise mobility. And actually, this is the whole slide. Sorry, I have slides out of order in my head. We're partnered with them. We provide the charger and the software to optimize charging and discharge and sell power back to the local utility, which is Eversource in Boston. An enterprise owns this car. We split the month-to-month rental with a tenant who is a low-income driver, lives in the building, and the remainder is paid for by a grant, plus the income from Eversource. The other car share projects are, we have one at the Alliance Center in Denver, Colorado. This is actually a shared workspace, includes a shared car, which provides vehicle to building services to reduce the electric bills for the tenant, the landlord, not the tenant, at the Alliance Center. We have a project that we've just launched a month ago with Xcel Energy, Colorado Car Share, and Boulder Housing Partners, which is Public Housing Authority in Boulder, Colorado. There are 2 Nissan Leafs, plus our bi-directional chargers and our software to optimize the charge and discharge. Anyone can go and check out either of these cars, the Alliance Center or 30 Pearl. And by the end of the summer, we'll be launching another car share in Detroit in partnership with Sway Mobility. This project is funded by the Michigan Mobility Platform. It's in downtown Detroit, and we are specifically advertising to low and moderate income drivers as a low-cost solution for getting around town. So a question that has come up in our planning and discussion for this webinar is what's needed in order to support car shares, and this slide deck will be available to everyone after the call, but pretty much I've always worked with utilities in my role as Senior Director of Grid Solutions. They know all the customers, so everyone is a utility customer, have the relationship with the landlords and can introduce us and help the landlords understand what the make-ready incentives are and how to make this a sensible solution for their tenants as well as for energy management. Our role is site design, installation, interconnection. We have a network of car share companies that we work with, and we'll also support that charger while it's installed. And then lastly, the landlord, their responsibility is to provide site access, especially if this is going to be a publicly accessible car share. And, once this is all installed, they have the nice job of sitting back and saving money on their electric bill while providing a new amenity to their tenants. The ideal setup is finding a multifamily property that has 480 volt and 3-phase power, but of course, if that is not there, we can install a transformer. Ideally, it's a large load building, and the reason why we look for such a large load is because we want to be certain that the power from the car when discharged is self-consumed on site. Generally, we prefer to look for a disadvantaged community, mostly for the e-mobility aspect, but there is also the possibility that when developing projects in these communities under the new tax code, you can qualify for an additional 30% off the project development costs. Finally, what we are looking for when we're developing these projects, and perhaps this could be a take-home item for this group, it seems like everyone's well connected in California, is making sure that vehicle to grid interconnection processes are ready to go with utilities and that they understand them well as being well versed in their own make-ready incentives in order to educate customers and landlords. So I'll end with these two slides, which are testimony from our driver in Boston. When we started the project, he said he'd watched the cost to fill up his tank nearly double in the past few years. I wanted to get an electric vehicle, but there was nowhere to charge it overnight near my apartment in Dorchester. I'm really excited about this opportunity to bring EV charging to my neighborhood and to share what we learned with the community. And so at the start of this summer, after he has had this car for 9 months, this is what he has said, this experience with the EV. I work Monday to Friday and drive from Dorchester to Abington, which is 15 miles away. I would spend $150 to $200 a month on gas. I don't spend any on gas now, just saving money. I've been telling my friends and family about the program, and I can see all my friends are interested now just because it's a good car to drive. And so all of this from making a car rental from Enterprise affordable for one driver in this low-income apartment building. So my goal is to scale these projects, this offering. I welcome any outreach from anyone on this call about how we could bring this to your community.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everyone for your questions in the chat. I want to invite folks to continue asking questions in the Q&A tab, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And we will follow up with our presenters at the end of the webinar with your questions. Next, I would love to invite Rachel Zook from Nuvi to present. She's going to be talking about school district partnerships and virtual power plants. Rachel, I invite you to come on screen as well if you're able.
I am also unable to start my video.
Okay. Oh, now we can
Let's
see
see.
you.
Can you see me now? Amazing.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
And we're seeing your, right now, your full screen. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
looking good.
All right. My name is Rachel Zook. I'm with Nuvi, where I've been for coming up on 3 years. I'm Director of Utilities and Markets, and today I'm going to focus on virtual power plants and how Nuvi is working with school districts around the US to integrate into VPPs. A little bit about Nuvi. We operate around the world, but our global headquarters are in San Diego, California. That's where I am located as well. Anybody who has heard me present before is probably tired of me saying this, but I really like to focus on the fact that there is 25 plus years of research and development behind vehicle to grid technology. So V2G was patented in 1996 at the University of Delaware by Professor Dr. Willett Kempton. He's actually one of the co-founders of Nuvi and still one of our senior advisors. A lot of people think that V2G is this brand new technology. It's really not. It's been around for decades. And with that in mind, we've actually been doing over 7 years of continuous vehicle to grid commercial operations in Denmark, where we're not only injecting energy into the grid, we are also providing ancillary services like frequency regulation. Specifically within the US, we have over 500 electric vehicles connected to our GIVE platform, or our grid integrated vehicle platform. In California alone, we are working with over 100 school districts. In the map towards the right, you'll see that this is where we are currently operating in the US. The darkest green shows where we are actively doing vehicle to grid projects, where we are actively injecting energy into the grid. The medium green shows where we have projects, but we are not yet putting energy into the grid, whether it's because we're still working things out with the utility or there's no current pathway for doing so. And then lightest green is where we do not yet have any activities. So virtual power plant is basically a power plant that's made up of distributed energy resources. At Nuvi, we focus specifically on integrating EV batteries into virtual power plants or VPPs. And we have a really strong focus on school buses. The reason for that is that school buses have large batteries, extremely predictable schedules, and they're frequently just sitting around during the summer months when the grid most needs additional energy. VPPs can provide services to the grid that not only add capacity, like injecting energy, but can also provide additional stability and prevent blackouts. Large vehicle to grid hubs can have a massive impact on the grid. Just thinking about 200 electric school buses that are connected at 125 kilowatts, which is very feasible with the technology that exists now. That's 25 megawatts of capacity right there. And to think about that in maybe more relatable terms, that's the equivalent of reducing the peak consumption of 10,000 households by 50%. There are many programs across the US that are incorporating vehicle to grid technology, which is great. A lot of them started as demand response programs, and they've, over time developed to incorporate other resources and allowed not only, reduction of demand, but also participants to add energy and get paid the same amounts. One of the programs I'd like to focus on is the Emergency Load Reduction Program in California, also known as ELRP. This is a program that pays customers to reduce their energy consumption or discharge to the grid during grid emergencies. It pays $2 per kilowatt hour. That's either energy reduced or energy sent to the grid. It's a 6-month-long program. It runs from May 1st through October 31st. It's managed by the 3 investor-owned utilities in California. That's PG&E, SCE, and SDG&E. Nuvi had 1 school district participating in 2022, 2 in 2023, and there are going to be a lot more in 2024. I know that these numbers look small. 2022 was the first year that VGI resources were even allowed to be part of ELRP. At that time, Nuvi was the only participant doing VGI in the program. Same with last year. I do think that there will be more VGI aggregators this year. So the very first school district that we did ELRP with is Cajon Valley Union School District.
that's inland in San Diego County. You'll see on the map, it gets really hot there, extremely hot. So very important that we're able to support the grid in that particular location. And during that initial season, we were able to discharge 767 kilowatt hours, some pretty substantial greenhouse gas reductions. And you'll see the equivalent home served just under 450. We did have an even better season in 2023, and we had another school district participating, but I did not get the approval to publicly share those numbers ahead of this call. Hopefully I'll be able to do that very soon. To be able to give a better idea into what we're looking at for this coming season, I did estimates based on what Nuvve has deployed with school districts in PG&E, STE, and SDG&E territories, and I used the event information from 2023. Obviously, I don't know what exact events will be called in 2024, but it's likely that it'll be somewhat similar to 2023. So just given what we have in the ground in these territories right now, we are looking at over 5 megawatts injected into the grid for each event, which is a pretty incredible number. Given last year's events, we would be able to do the full 5 megawatts for every event, and that totaled over 45 megawatts for the entire season. And we're really just getting started. This is going to continue to scale. More and more school districts are going to be getting electric school buses. There are going to be other vehicle types added. These virtual power plants are including electric vehicle batteries, stationary storage, really any kind of DER that can be aggregated into this. It's a really, really powerful resource. As Zach mentioned earlier, helps us stay away from peaker plants, things that are really bad for the grid, really bad for the environment. I mainly focused on ELRP. I do want to talk about a couple of other programs. Connected Solutions is a great one that exists on the East Coast, quite similar to ELRP, really good incentives for anyone participating, including school districts. We have our first district doing it this summer, which we're really excited about. That is in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and I believe New Hampshire. New York has other programs. We are also doing various pilots across the United States. So we're very hopeful that within the next couple of years, we will see the implementation of EV batteries, especially with school districts, into VPPs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And again, thank you all for your questions. Please feel free to continue asking in the Q&A tab. Next, I'm going to invite Robert Stafford from the World Resources Institute on screen, and we can see your video, so that's great. Robert is going to be talking about school buses for mutual aid. And you are muted, Robert.
I am muted. I figured that one out. Thank you. But imagine, bet the screen's coming through okay. Yeah, hi everyone. Robert Stafford here. I'm a research associate doing grid resiliency and fleet electrification with World Resources Institute's Electric School Bus Initiative. And I'm going to be talking a bit about mutual aid agreements, how those school buses can be used in event of emergency, right? We're hearing, really great things, love the V2G, and, really happy to see more school buses being a part of that program. This is looking forward a little bit more too on what school buses can do in event of emergency. Get that advancing. There we go. So first off, just why electrify the US school bus fleet? I think it's really important to just go through, right? What is a kind of common argument or a common discussion we keep having, right? It's on top of avoiding greenhouse gas emissions, on top of the resiliency, new jobs, it also is just cleaner air for kids, right? Not breathing in diesel exhausts, making our communities better, safer, and reducing operating costs for schools. But like I said, we're going to be focusing more on the resiliency and renewables integration part of that. And moving on, let's talk a bit more about mutual aid agreements and natural disasters. So as the climate continues to change, we're seeing more disasters occur, particularly here in California, right? We get more threat of fire, drier conditions, also seeing, stronger storms, flood events, things like that. I know here in San Diego we had really bad floods not too long ago. And it tends to be underserved communities that are the hardest hit by this, right? The lowest resource communities, rural communities. And so electric school bus adoption has the opportunity to help add to that resiliency as part of these mutual aid agreements. You know, think of the school bus, right, as a diesel generator on wheels, right? It's power that you can move around anywhere in the system, and if the system is equipped for it, can put back into that. So your diesel generator powering an emergency shelter, your diesel generator powering even, right? Imagine a world where you have electric school bus pull up and power your gas pumps so that everyone can continue, in the next few years in an emergency getting gas into their cars. Eventually, we're all hopefully going electric, but the school bus can help provide resiliency in the middle of that. School buses are particularly good for disaster response, right? Because in much the same way as school buses have those, very regular schedules, kids aren't going to school during emergencies. And so you have a whole fleet of school buses, a whole set of batteries on wheels, ready to be deployed wherever you want. And it's also worth noting that this is transferable across different medium and heavy duty sections, but the school buses are a good door in there, right? If you figure out how to do it with a school bus, you can figure out how to do it with a refuse truck, large, other large, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. The school buses, they're going to enhance community and grid resilience, strengthen national security, decrease environmental impacts. It really is a large set of benefits that is unrealized, right? Is having a tough time kind of getting off the ground because there are a lot of folks to involve. The key stakeholders here, right? This is absolutely a non-exhaustive list, but if you're talking about using a school bus for emergency situations, you're talking about your utility, your school district, your facility managers, the making sure the buses are equipped to do it in the first place with the, ESB manufacturers, making sure you have the right charging stations, making sure that your site is equipped to handle power. And so really what the MAA process, the mutual aid agreement process, is for is to do a bit of that pre-planning. Say this is a tool that we want to have in the future and be able to plan forward for that, right? Get your school district, your emergency manager on the same page so that they can use that resource in the future. Links, I believe in the chat or afterwards, will be our source for mutual aid agreements. Really recommend take a look at it. If you're, at all involved in your local community, it's a very great resource just to pass along to, the local fire department, the local school district. The more eyes you get on something like this now, the easier the process becomes when you can eventually spin this up. But yeah, there's a lot of steps to go through. It's a complicated process. It's a lot of planning. So starting it earlier, coordination, figuring out where those buildings are going to be. Oftentimes school buildings are emergency shelters anyways. And so it's a, win-win to kind of electrify, upgrade the school, get a charger in there, but also prepare that to, receive power from the school's fleet. During an emergency, right, you're going to have, predefined locations where the school bus can pull up to provide power. You're going to be deploying the school buses, figuring out how much power is being used, what the compensation mechanisms are, and eventually, disconnecting the school bus, getting it back on the road, and getting it back to being a bus after the fact. These mutual aid agreements aren't new to school buses. They're something that exists, widely within emergency management already. This is just a kind of new use case for these mutual aid agreements. They already exist with, fire response, hazardous material response. And so, if you bring this to an emergency manager, if you talk to someone in your city, your town, about this, someone will know what they're talking about and how this fits into their emergency management. But overall, I think the thing that we right, it's easy to get bogged down in the details here. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to be done. The top line of it, though, is start the process. Keep it simple. Have the conversation. The tool provided is a great way to be able to go through this conversation, iron out some of those more difficult points. But really, the sooner you start talking about it, the sooner that the resource is going to be there. School buses are coming. The electric school buses are going to be a fantastic resource, and not having to pay for a diesel generator, pay for that upkeep, pay for that maintenance is going to be a really important part to also just making our neighborhoods, our municipalities more safe, more secure, and more financially viable. But yeah, happy to talk about this more. Thank you for giving me the time to talk about this. Really, always fan of being able to talk more about school buses. Really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you to all of our speakers today. This concludes the presentational part of the webinar, and we're now going to move into Q&A. So I'll invite our speakers to come back on video, and we will start asking you some of the questions from the chat and from the Q&A. And if attendees continue to think of questions, or if you have follow-ups, again, feel free to pop those in the Q&A tab, and we will continue to monitor the chat. So let's start off. We have a question from Sue. Charging at night is 10 times more carbon intensive than charging during the day when California has excess solar to charge cleanly. Is there any movement to get more workplace charging so people can come home and either use their clean energy or sell it to the grid? And this is a question for anybody who wants to take this one.
I can comment briefly on this, Sue. Thanks for the question. I think you're right on. This is an important initiative that should be pursued, and we have in the past seen the state of California, both through its Public Utilities Commission and as well as its Energy Commission, these two key state agencies, drive the development of workplace charging. That said, there are some open questions right now at both of those agencies on how much future funding should be used for workplace charging compared to other charging use cases. For example, DC fast charging sites, the sort of the gas station model, if you will, or a focus less on workplace charging and more on charging that either is located at or is serving apartment buildings or multi-unit dwellings. Multifamily housing. So it's a bit of an open question what the future is going to look like on this. There are certainly stakeholders, VGIC included, that want to see more development of workplace charging and more of the funding that flows through these agencies, and that ultimately will flow through either the utility or a third-party implementer, move toward those sites, because there is such a strong imperative to soak up the excess solar we have, and then as you noted, use that to sell back to the grid or power our homes and businesses in the evening peak.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, I think another question here that we have sort of is related to what you're saying about there's movement here for this, there's an imperative, but there's obstacles. So we have a question from Bob. What are current V2G V2H obstacles, and who can help us navigate and overcome the existing resistance? This can be for Zach or anyone else.
Yeah, I don't want to occupy too much. That said, I think we have a lot of folks that are on the panel that are more on the vehicle to building side or vehicle to grid. So I can speak a little bit more on vehicle to home, since we cover that in our scope. So when we were discussing earlier the sort of backup power use case where you're using your vehicle, as Robert put very well, effectively a diesel generator, sort of a backup generator on wheels, when the grid is down and when the power is out to support your home, and then you have the vehicle to home where you might actually be interacting a little bit more, even when you are connected to the grid, and doing some sort of arbitrage or sort of offsetting your costs and managing your costs, your sort of bill as a residential customer. So those are sort of the two types of vehicle to home. So I'll take them quickly one at a time. On the backup power piece, some of the obstacles here include costs of the system. So we see systems sold by Ford. Soon, I think they're just now kind of rolling out from General Motors with the Chevy Silverado EV. Technically, the Tesla Cybertruck as well has this power share feature, and the equipment associated with it. And I know Kia and Wallbox and several others have announced equipment that they're hoping to make available in this year, in 2024. So that said, the costs are still relatively high because it's a somewhat early technology. There are some programs where you can get incentives to help buy down the cost. So for example, Pacific Gas and Electric has a vehicle to everything pilot for residential customers where they can support some of the installation costs. But that cost barrier does loom, and it's going to just take time for that to naturally come down, or additional incentives from the state of California or through your utility to help bring down those costs. Another barrier is the actual infrastructure deployment can take time. You might need upgrades to your home or to your service drop from the utility, and that can just frankly take a long time. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a backlog with requests, not just for bidirectional charging, but for all sorts of other home or end use electrification projects. And then on the second use case, less so backup power, but more on sort of trading energy with the utility, selling it to the utility from your home. That vehicle to home use case, that it's maybe more interactive. You're arbitraging or you're offsetting your costs, and not having to consume from the grid during peak times. A lot of those same barriers exist around the cost of the equipment. There's different equipment involved because you don't necessarily need to have what's called a transfer switch that you need for backup power. But there are still high costs. Additionally, there's still some uncertainty in working with the utility and how how some of these compensation mechanisms might work out. For example, if you end up generating more or selling more back to the grid than you're actually using from the grid. And for those familiar with sort of rooftop solar, this is a related concept that's loomed over solar for a while as well. So happy to follow up offline too, but that was a lot of that was a long answer. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. A lot of really good information. Moving over to Rachel, we have a question for you. What are some roadblocks that Nuvve has encountered in scaling V2G?
Yeah, there are a lot that I can think of. I'll just focus on a couple of them. I think one in general is that it's just not very well known. I frequently see misinformation proliferated. Sometimes I see articles that will have a claim about negative implications of V2G or how expensive it is, and there's no citation for where that information is coming from. So I think it's really important that we're circulating quality information to make sure that consumers and people in the industry fully understand what V2G is capable of, what the costs are, what the savings are. And I think there's a lot of misinformation within utilities and utility type entities as well, of how difficult it might be to incorporate it into existing programs, making sure that their interconnection agreements cover resources beyond, solar and stationary storage. I think that the more that we can get utilities on board, understanding that V2G helps make electric vehicles assets to the grid as opposed to liabilities, that it's helpful for them, that it's really going to improve things on their end. The more this can scale, the more there will be vehicle to grid focused incentives. I keep saying vehicle to grid, but also vehicle to building, vehicle to home. And we will really see things scale up once we tackle those issues.
Thank you, Rachel. We've got a question for Robert. What emergencies might a school bus be useful in assisting? Are there some emergencies that are more suited to having a school bus as backup power? Yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, California, the two big things that jump to me are fire and threat of fire, right? It's, you know, during fire events, you're gonna have folks moving, you're gonna have buses available to be able to be redeployed to a location. And in particular, if you have folks fleeing their homes, coming to a shelter, that's gonna be a great place. The other one is PSPS events, public safety power shutoffs. Right, if we have these events continuing to go forward, the utility calls those in advance. There's a system for, right, communicating that out, and if you know that the power is going to be shut off on a given day, that's a really great use for, you know, you cancel school the day before, you get the bus over there, the bus can provide power to a shelter. And yeah, it really, that's the California specific application. We definitely have also seen, you know, we have that there are actually school districts going through the MAA process right now. We just had our first signed. I'm really excited by it. Out in Illinois, and right, Illinois' emergencies are going to look very different from California's emergencies. You're going to have, you know, heavy snow events. You're going to have in that region they get tornadoes occasionally, right? It really is, you can build the use case out for your specific location. This isn't just one kind of emergency, but California specifically, first thought is absolutely fire.
Yes, we've definitely had our fair share of fires in California. Melissa, question for you about how do we scale up projects like the Boston project? What would be involved in that, and what are barriers to that as well?
This is a great question. So the Boston project, we've been thinking through different types of car ownership questions, and I'm also trying to think about how to roll in some answers to some questions that I've seen like in the Q&A. So, somebody asked the question about whether the type of project I described in Boston is only possible with grants. And I guess something to put out there for this group and the audience is, grants are needed for EV charging in general, not even necessarily with the vehicle to grid aspect, but public charging, fleet charging. There's so much need to develop infrastructure. And with the slow pace of reforming utility pricing schemes, it's going to take some time before it pencils out for a fleet or a city or a landlord to buy and operate chargers without the transactive rates or the way to monetize how you charge and discharge cars. So I'll just put that out there to begin with, that grants aren't just needed for EV car shares. They're not just needed for school buses. They're really needed in order to make infrastructure affordable in the absence of the rates that help with the payback. And so getting to the scale up, things that I have been working through with partners is, what is the model for private car ownership or private car rental like we have in that Boston project, one driver or one household and one car at a reduced price, versus car share, shared mobility, with, say, a neighborhood or community that's also a parked bank of batteries that's serving the utility, and pursuing both routes where we can. And so the partnerships that I've been developing in this respect are with car share and rental fleets, partnerships with state energy resource or public housing authorities, agencies that have relationships with drivers and landlords in order to try to get these programs launched. And trying to work with their utilities directly if they already have the market design that supports vehicle to grid, or with policy and regulatory bodies to talk about, here is a technology and business use case that solves two problems with one technology. One is the desire to have more EVs on the road, and the second is to accelerate grid modernization. So how do we work together and develop the programs and get these technologies out there? I'd say the biggest hurdles that I have seen and I'm learning about in talking with partners and others who are developing EV car shares, even without the vehicle to grid component, is the incentives for personal car ownership are so high that it's actually more affordable at this time in this country anyways to own your personal car rather than to share a car. And another is insurance models. So something that really is a challenge in the markets that have developed or tried to develop these vehicle to grid car share programs, namely Massachusetts and New York, is there are not yet car insurance models for renting cars and using them as stationary battery assets. And before I negotiated the agreement with Enterprise Rent-A-Car to be the partner on renting the car to the Boston driver, I was getting quotes for just like, if you're wearing a hat, just hold on to it, like $13,000 a year to insure that one car for this purpose. So there's a lot of reform that's needed, not just with utility rate infrastructure, policies that incentivize personal car ownership, but all kinds of things that I probably haven't even begun to scratch the surface on, like insurance and other things related to car ownership.
Thank you, Melissa. We're going to switch to a more technical question now. Somebody asks, I would really like to know if all EVs with fast DC charging have the hardware to do V to H and V to G. Is it true that this could be enabled just with a simple software update? This can be for anybody who wants to answer.
Sure, I'm happy to take that one too. So before I get into the technologies, I'll just give a refresher on electricity. So electricity is delivered at 60 hertz. It's a alternating sine wave like this, so alternating current. And so when we talk about vehicle to grid, that means when the car is discharged, it passes through an inverter, taking the power directly off the battery and into an inverter to match the grid. So that's what we mean by vehicle to grid. Vehicle to building and vehicle to home means the charger is connected behind the meter and the power can be consumed by the building or the home, but it can still be vehicle to grid if that home or building is connected to a grid when you discharge the car. So like that, I guess you could all just like hand wave, imagine it's just like that, but it happens to be passing through the building or home, or you can still be receiving some power from the grid. You're not going to create problems where you're off sync or amplifying that wave. But there are solutions where you do have to island from the grid because that solution is developed by the auto manufacturer does not yet have the capability to sync with the grid. So sometimes when you see solutions that are advertised as vehicle to home or vehicle to building solutions only, it means that the vehicle does not have the capability to sync. The technologies, and Rachel, I don't want to speak for you, so that we're using on our platform have the inverter on board the charger. So it's thought of as off-board inverter in order to take the power off of the bidirectional car and match it with the grid. There are future technologies where the inverter will be on board the cars, and I think that opens up really a whole other conversation around how auto manufacturers and utilities and regulators and their customers need to think about interconnection, because that means anywhere there's a car, you could possibly provide power to the grid. You know, today with the inverter in the charger, when you interconnect, the utility knows the address where a car might show up and provide power. But if the inverter is on board the car, it could show up anywhere and provide power as long as there's a charger.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. Question for Rachel. Could you discuss the possible role of virtual power plants in speeding the adoption of V2G? Wouldn't repayment be higher to the vehicle owner and simpler for the utility than direct utility coordination?
Do you repeat the second part of that one?
Yes. Wouldn't repayment be higher to the vehicle owner and simpler for the utility than direct utility coordination?
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's asking really why the utilities would be so involved in the coordination between a customer sending energy to the grid and receiving payment from the grid. And if I'm misunderstanding that, then please add to the chat or the Q&A, and I can address it. So the way that it's currently set up, there's not an option for a customer, whether it's commercial or residential, to sell energy directly to the grid. Unless they're connected directly at the transmission level. All of the existing programs go through the utilities. So like for the emergency load reduction program that I mentioned, or connected solutions, you do have to go through the utilities. They will check any readings that you have from your EV meter against their own utility meter to do settlement. So at this time, there's no other way. Things will open up more in the future with for quarter 22. So maybe in 4 or 5 years, things will look very different. But at this time, the utilities have to be involved. And Zach, if you'd like to add anything to that, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I would say even within that, I everything you said, I'm fully in agreement with. I'd say even within that last statement of utilities involvement, that can look a number of different ways, right? It could be several what we would refer to as aggregators, folks that help to coordinate the bidirectional charging and kind of plays a bit of a buffer between the utility and the customer. And so, this is something I know that both Nuvve and Fermata do and help play that role. So it might not be, but there also could be an architecture or a design where there is no aggregator, right? And it's a direct utility customer engagement. So right now, because I think this is new to a lot of folks, I think for a while will still be that additional sort of buffer between utilities and customers. And frankly, I think there's a lot of benefit in having that buffer as well. But maybe that provides a little bit more color. When you say direct utility coordination, it's kind of with an asterisk, right? It could be direct, but more than likely there's still other parties involved helping to manage and coordinate. And those include some of the parties on this call as well. Hopefully that helps to provide some more detail and context.
Thank you, Zach. We have a question about which car companies are promoting V2G right now. Barry says, it seems like Nissan is the only, Barry, our attendee, not our Climate Center staff member. It seems like Nissan is the only light-duty EV manufacturer that is enthusiastically promoting V2G. Are there others? This is a question for anyone who wants to take it.
I can't speak 100% on behalf of all the automakers, but what I can say is if you dig around and you see the news articles and the webinars, you'll be able to find other automakers sharing news about their plans in the near future, including this year, to expand their products that are vehicle to home to vehicle to grid. So can't get into too much detail again because I don't work for the automakers themselves, but we do have many of those automakers in VGIC, and I can say, given their engagement in our organization and seeing their engagement on some of these more technical matters, there is a great deal of momentum and interest and investment, frankly, from these automakers in making that move over to bidirectional, vehicle to grid use cases. And that's what we're working through a lot as VGIC in partnership with Fermata and Nuvi and many others, is alleviating all these barriers that we've discussed so that there's a very smooth and streamlined path forward.
Cool, thank you. And Zach, we have another question for you. SCE proposed a V2G tariff of 58 cents per kilowatt hour during the summer months in the evenings. Do you know if that is likely to be approved by the CPUC?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's hard to tell. It's still very early. They just proposed that, I think, in late March, early April. These proceedings take a very long time, unfortunately. So it may not be for, honestly, several years before we know whether that's going to be approved by the CPUC. It's just too early to tell. That said, that is one of several options for compensation for customers within Southern California Edison service territory. Another opportunity is a dynamic pricing pilot that they are launching this summer, I believe. And that's another opportunity for customers to get compensated for exports from different technologies, including bidirectional charging equipment. In addition to that, there's the emergency load reduction program that was mentioned earlier, as well as another program that's not implemented by Southern California Edison, but rather by the California Energy Commission, called the Demand Side Grid Support Program. So there are these different options. That SCE, that 58 cent per kilowatt hour proposal, is designed a little bit differently than the other ones I mentioned. They all have their own sort of flavors, and there's no one consistent sort of methodology, because there's likely going to be different customers that want to interact in different ways. Some want to, might want that sort of static single price. Some might want a more dynamic price that changes based on the conditions on the grid, and some might want that more event-based, what is called sort of demand response, where you're during a specific emergency or high price event, you're paid a fixed price for your response. So that's why there are the different options. Part of it too is experimenting and seeing where there is interest in these different opportunities, so that we can design more consistent policy moving forward once we have more data on sort of who's interested in what, and what sort of participation rates and real benefits, both monetary and in terms of carbon reduction, we're going to get from each of those different pricing designs.
Thank you, Zach. A question for Robert about the school bus model. So someone said, I like the school bus model, but I have some questions about how it works with regard to timing. School buses are active in the morning hours between 7 and 9, and then in the early afternoon between 2 and 4. So if discharged by 4 p.m., there wouldn't be much time to charge up before you'd want the power to the grid in evening hours. And if you are using solar power to charge, then there wouldn't be much time to charge before 7 a.m. So can you clarify more about what the value would be?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a balancing act. So the kind of overlying thought should be that school bus charging looks very different on a school day than it does on a non-school day, particularly right over the summer. On a school day, you're going to have transit hours, you're going to have a sweet spot of time in the middle. That's going to be really high peak solar time. So if you have a powerful enough charger, you can draw down all that solar, have it act as a really great sponge for all of that energy that we're producing. Hopefully, lower costs for folks, bring more solar on the grid. That does require a higher power charger typically. But then if you can't pull all of your power in these buses can usually drive in the range of like 100 to 150 miles on a charge. And so you're going to see, depending on how long your route is, that might be enough time to do charging in the middle of the day, route in the evening, route in the morning. You do see some overnight charging though, right? Particularly on lower power chargers, you're just going to need it. And that can be supported by, right, wind power, batteries. You can kind of figure that out and make sure that also buses aren't charging during peak demand hours. Over the summer or on the weekends, school days where the school's not in session, it's actually probably better for the battery to be cycling, right? These batteries don't like being stationary. They like having a little bit of flex to them. And so half the days of the year, right? 180 school days, half the days of the year, this is going to be a really solid resource for any kind of V2G operations being able to, particularly during the summer, shave peak load. And yeah, it is a complex balance though. We had a document get put out recently called The Day in the Life of Electric School Bus. Highly recommend check it out. It's a really nice kind of graphical representation of what charging looks like on any given day.
Thank you so much. And we can drop a link for that in the chat later or send that out afterward. Rachel, we have a question for you about battery life. So while integrating V2G into the peaks and valleys of the 24-hour period, does charging, I assume that means the demands and valleys and or the peaks and valleys of grid demand, does charging and discharging the vehicle reduce the life of the battery of the vehicle?
So all the EV batteries have a certain number of cycles that the manufacturer determines is safe, and they base their warranty on that. Speaking for Nuvve only, but I'm sure that other V2G companies are doing this. We work with the manufacturers to work out what exactly that sweet spot is. We know how low we can drain the battery. We never take it to 0% to keep it from degrading. Early on, we had a much smaller range that we were working within. Now it's really big, upwards of 90% with some manufacturers. If you were to cycle the battery 10 times a day for 10 years, that would be problematic. But generally, the way that these programs are structured, where you're being called quite a bit during certain seasons, Connected Solutions, I think will probably be about 50 events throughout the summer, and there are others that might call 10 to 12 events every month. That kind of cycling is not going to negatively impact the battery's health. There are various papers on this. In addition to that, when we're doing integrations with OEMs, the battery remains under the same OEM warranty. V2G doesn't negate that. It doesn't make it lower. So we are confident, the OEMs that we work with are confident that there's not a significant negative impact at all.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on this a little bit. I think that point about warranty is very important too. And part of that, and just as a case study here, if you put yourself in the shoes of like Ford, right, with their Lightning Electric, they have their F-150 Lightning Electric pickup truck and the backup power equipment that you can buy to use with that for home backup power. That's a case where, again, putting yourself in Ford's shoes, they looked at the different use cases and they said, we're going to cover this within our warranty. And Nissan did the same thing with their Nissan Leaf. They have fleets of analysts and lawyers, and they construct these warranties very carefully. And there's also requirements they have to meet from the regulators on what those warranties look like. So as Rachel mentioned, it's not as though using the equipment this way would void the warranty. It's that you're actually using it in a way that is sanctioned under warranty, so to speak. And this is from the automakers looking into these battery cycling issues and state of health, and incorporating that into the warranty. So it's sort of the automakers making the determination. They say, look, we looked at all this, and this is what makes sense. So as we see automakers embracing more and more use cases, there might be some bounds, right? It might not be customers are able to endlessly cycle every day, 10 times a day, like Rachel was saying. But it could be, within these certain bounds, this is what's going to be covered by warranty. So a little bit of that is still TBD. Again, we know more on the school bus side, where folks like Vermata and Nuvi and others, and many others out there have been doing these pilots and working with OEMs on that side, where those same sort of bounds have been very clearly defined for those projects.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you everyone for your questions. We have one final question before we move to our action. What is the role of advocacy in getting the policy and regulatory engagement that is needed to grow opportunities for vehicle-to-grid integration? This is a question for any and all of our panelists.
I can start. I can say, VGIC, if you're I'll say if you're listening to this session today and you are a company or organization that's looking to grow the market for these solutions and unlock all these barriers, all the engagement that we do with the California Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, is all really, really core to growing the market. So I would encourage folks to reach out if their organization is interested in helping to support the work we do. So a bit of a shameless plug there. And then beyond that, I think groups like the Climate Center, World Resources Institute, of course, and others are really active in the space and quite savvy on what is a relatively technical topic. And it's hard, sometimes can be hard to conduct advocacy on issues that are this technical and wonky. So, just one last takeaway here. I think to the extent we can continue fine tuning as a full collective here, the way we talk about this and underscoring the key barriers and what we're trying to get at, while also clarifying some of the technical matters in a way that's easy on the ears and easy to understand, is going to be really important to the advocacy moving forward.
Does anybody else want to add?
Yeah, happy to add a quick comment. I think in terms of kind of advocacy and outreach, from what we've seen, particularly in the school district space, is that lots of folks are very excited about things like VDG, right? Or VGI, right? All of these programs. And the issue becomes kind of figuring out what kind of Zach was alluding to, right, is a very wonky topic, right? Some things work with other things, some things don't work with other things. How do you get money back? Is this a pilot? Is this and I think kind of the thing that school districts, right, speaking from electric school bus side, need is a sense of direction, a sense of clarity, right? There's kind of not a there's not necessarily that like there is one right solution, but getting a solution out there saying this is what you're going to do, or even just saying this product is not like VDG capable, right? And branding that right on the front, kind of not hedging with like, oh, we might support this in the future, we might do X, we might do Y. Like, say what it is on the box, get the confusion out of there, and Yeah, and on advocacy side, like pushing for more conversation around that, I think would be my comment.
Thank you, Robert. Melissa, Rachel, any last thoughts?
Sure. So I agree with everything Zach and Robert said, and to speak specifically to EV car shares that would use vehicle to grid, the things that I spoke to earlier. If these are solutions that you want to see in your community, the great I've outlined in my deck how to engage your local utility, how to ask them the questions that are needed, to think through how to take advantage of their available incentives for chargers and EVs, how to educate landlords on this solution. And because earlier in this Q&A, I did touch on some of the policy issues that I uncovered as I was trying to develop my first project here in Boston, which ranged everything from interconnection, and I know that that's something that the BGIC has been leading the conversations on in California, and insurance. I haven't looked at what the cost of insurance is in California, but I hope that that is not a barrier to the development of vehicle to grid car shares.
Thank you, Melissa. Rachel, anything else to add?
The other three spoke, so I do feel obligated. I agree with what everybody else said. Really quickly, I would just say that if you want to advocate for V2G, it's truly bringing it up in every single conversation about DERs, about electric vehicles, whether it's webinar, in-person, local community event. You're submitting comments to the CPUC in your spare time, or whatever state you live in, Public Utilities Commission, Regulatory Commission. Ask about it constantly. It lets people know that you do care about it, that the public is aware, and that it's not something that they can just drop and think that nobody will notice.
Yes, thank you. And we hope that attending this webinar today has given you some more tools and information to bring up V2G and VGI in conversations in all kinds of spheres. We have attendees working in all sectors, and we know that this conversation is relevant with so many different stakeholders in the rollout of V2G. So we're going to end with a call to action from the Climate Center. But first, I just want to thank all of our speakers, Melissa Chan, Robert Stafford, Rachel Zook, and Zach Wugin, again for your time and your expertise today. Really, you all are leading and making this a critical part of conversations on an equitable and speedy transition to a better energy system. So I'm going to share my screen again. We've got an opportunity for all of you to, oops, are you seeing my screen? No.
Not yet.
Let's try this again. Okay, we have an opportunity for you to endorse Climate Safe California, our campaign at the Climate Center to remove more climate pollution than we emit by 2030. We've got over 2,000 supporters of this campaign, and if you check the chat, there's a link now where you can drop in and endorse it. You can also scan the QR code. And also, finally, I want to invite you to our next webinar, which will be Thursday, July 25th. And if you get on our Climate Safe California campaign mailing list, you will be hearing about this webinar as well as more information becomes available. So thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you to everyone in the audience for asking your thoughtful questions. And that concludes our webinar.